In the heart of a city carved from glass and steel inside a corporate cathedral, where fortunes are made and broken with a single keystroke, a little girl's world was shattering. Her screams echoed off the cold, polished marble of the Vance Innovations Tower, a sound so raw it seemed to crack the very air. Security guards shifted, executives averted their gazes, and a powerful mother watched from the shadows, her heart clenching in helpless agony. None of them knew what to do. But from the periphery, a man in a simple grey uniform, a man paid to be invisible, began to walk forward. In his hand he held no weapon, no tool of authority, only a small plastic bottle, a janitor armed with nothing but soap and water, about to face a storm that no one else could calm. The lobby of the Vance Innovations Tower was less a room and more a statement. It was a cavern of Italian marble and brushed chrome, dominated by a 3-story water feature that murmured with the hushed, expensive sound of money. Sunlight filtered through floor-to-ceiling panes of glass, painted sterile rectangles on the floor. It was a place designed to intimidate, to communicate power and precision. And on this particular Tuesday, it was the stage for a 5-year-old's complete and utter meltdown. Amelia Vance was a tiny tempest in a pink dress. Her cries were not the petulant whines of a spoiled child, but something deeper, more visceral, a sound of pure, unadulterated distress. Her small fists were balled, her face was a blotchy mask of red and tears, and her body was rigid with a tension that seemed too immense for her little frame to contain. "No, I don't want to." "I won't." She shrieked the sound sharp enough to make a passing executive flinch. Her mother, Evelyn Vance, stood a few feet away, a statue of impotent authority. Dressed in a navy blue power suit that was practically a uniform, Evelyn was the architect of this empire. She could command a boardroom of 20 seasoned investors, navigate hostile takeovers, and predict market fluctuations with unnerving accuracy. Yet she could not calm her own daughter. Every attempt, a soft word, a gentle touch, only seemed to fuel the fire. To the outside world, she was the formidable CEO of a billion-dollar tech giant. In this moment, she was just a mother, failing with a growing audience of her own employees. Her assistant, Mr. Peterson, a man whose solution to everything was a color-coded memo, hovered uselessly, his face a mixture of pity and panic. Leo Rossi was mopping the floor near the west entrance, his movements practiced and methodical. He tried to make himself small to blend into the background as his job required. He was a man of shadows and peripheries, arriving after the important people left and leaving before they returned. A midday shift like this was rare a favor for a sick colleague, and he was deeply regretting it. He could feel the tension in the air, a static charge of discomfort and judgment directed at the mother and child. Leo knew that sound. It wasn't a tantrum. It was the sound of a circuit overloading a small soul, drowning in a world that was too loud, too bright, too much. He knew it because he had heard a quieter version of it from his own son Noah after his wife Maria passed away. The world had become a scary, unpredictable place for his boy, and sometimes the sheer weight of it all would cause a similar, albeit smaller, collapse. He watched as a security guard, a well-meaning but imposing man named Dave, took a step toward Amelia. "Mom, is everything all right? Maybe some water?" "Stay back!" Amelia screamed, recoiling as if he'd brandished a weapon. Evelyn shot the guard a look that could freeze fire. "I have it under control." Her voice was tight, brittle. It was a lie, and everyone knew it. Leo's heart ached for the little girl, but more surprisingly, it ached for the mother. He saw past the expensive suit and the air of command. He saw the desperation in her eyes, the subtle tremor in her hand, as she resisted the urge to reach for her daughter again. She was trapped just like her child. He glanced at his utility cart. Tucked into a side pocket, next to a bottle of glass cleaner and a roll of paper towels, was a small, cheap plastic bottle of bubble solution and a little wand. It was Noah's. He'd left it in Leo's jacket pocket that morning, insisting his father might need emergency bubbles. Leo had laughed then, but now his hand closed around the small bottle. It felt like a crazy idea, an act of professional suicide. A janitor interfering with the CEO's daughter, he could be fired on the spot. He should just keep his head down, finish his work, and disappear. But then Amelia let out a heart-wrenching sob, a sound of complete despair, and Leo's decision was made. He was a father first and a janitor second. He left his cart and began to walk toward the center of the atrium. He didn't look at Evelyn, or the guards, or the gawking employees. He kept his eyes on the small, trembling girl. He moved slowly, unthreateningly, his worn work boots, making soft, shuffling sounds on the marble. When he was about 10 feet away, he stopped and knelt, making himself smaller than the child. He didn't say a word. He simply unscrewed the cap of the bottle. He dipped the plastic wand into the solution, a gesture as deliberate and focused as a surgeon preparing an instrument. Evelyn watched her breath caught in her throat. Who was this man? What did he think he was doing? Her every instinct screamed for her to intervene, to tell this janitor to get back to his work. But she was frozen, paralyzed by a desperate sliver of hope. Leo brought the wand to his lips. He took a slow, gentle breath and blew. A single, perfect bubble emerged. It wobbled for a second, then detached from the wand, catching the light from the massive windows. It was a shimmering, iridescent sphere, a tiny floating jewel of impossible colors. It drifted lazily through the air, a silent, magical thing in a room that had been filled with noise. Amelia's screaming stopped. It was as if a switch had been flicked. Her breath hitched, and her wide, tear-filled blue eyes locked onto the floating orb. Leo blew again. This time, a cluster of bubbles emerged, a constellation of shimmering spheres that floated up toward the high ceiling. They moved with a silent, dreamlike grace, catching the light and reflecting the vast, cold lobby in their fragile surfaces. Amelia was mesmerized. The tension in her small body seemed to dissipate, melting away with each bubble that drifted by. A tiny hiccuping sob escaped her, but it was the sound of a storm passing not one of its fury. She took a hesitant step forward, her hand reaching out not to strike or push, but to gently touch one of the delicate orbs. Her finger met the shimmering surface, and it vanished with a soft, silent pop. She looked at Leo, her eyes full of wonder. He gave her a small, gentle smile, and blew another stream of bubbles this time, aiming them lower, so they floated around her like tiny, magical companions. A small giggle escaped her lips, a sound as pure and surprising as the bubbles themselves. She began to move no longer, a rigid statue of distress, but a child dancing and twirling, trying to catch the delicate floating spheres before they disappeared. From her vantage point near a large marble pillar, Evelyn Vance watched unseen. The world around her had faded away. The judgmental stares of her employees, the ticking clock of her next meeting, the crushing weight of her own inadequacy, it all vanished. She was watching her daughter, really watching her, and seeing a joy that had been absent for months, ever since Richard's death. This stranger, this janitor with his cheap bottle of bubbles had reached her daughter in a way she, with all her resources and all her love, could not. Leo didn't stay long. He saw the girl's breathing had evened out, the color returning to her cheeks. He saw her mother start to move from the shadows. His job was done. Quietly, he screwed the cap back on the bottle, stood up, and walked back to his cart. He picked up his mop and resumed his work, his movements just as methodical as before, as if he had done nothing more remarkable than wipe away a scuff mark. Evelyn finally approached her daughter, who was now quietly watching the last few bubbles pop against the high ceiling. "Amelia, honey." Evelyn's voice was softer now, fragile. Amelia looked up at her mother, her eyes clear. "They were pretty, Mommy." Evelyn's throat tightened. She knelt and wrapped her arms around her daughter, and for the first time that day, Amelia hugged her back. As she held her child, Evelyn looked across the vast expanse of marble. She saw the janitor, his back to them, methodically mopping the floor. He hadn't asked for a thank you. He hadn't even looked for acknowledgement. He had simply seen a child in pain and offered a moment of gentle, silent magic. And Evelyn Vance, a woman who dealt in data acquisitions and billion-dollar contracts, knew she had just witnessed something invaluable, something she needed to understand. The rest of the day was a blur for Evelyn. She went through the motions of her meetings, her voice steady, her questions sharp, but her mind was elsewhere. It kept replaying the scene in the lobby, the raw panic in Amelia's screams, the silent judgment of the onlookers, and the sudden shimmering cascade of bubbles. The image of the janitor kneeling on the cold marble was seared into her memory. He hadn't patronized Amelia or dismissed her. He had simply changed her environment, offering a quiet distraction that allowed her to find her own way back to calm. It was an act of profound emotional intelligence. That evening, in her sterile, architect-designed penthouse overlooking the city, Evelyn sat with Mr. Peterson's official incident report. It was concise, professional, and utterly useless. It detailed the disruptive episode, the response time of security, and concluded with a recommendation to review protocols for non-employee access to the executive lobby. The janitor was mentioned in a single dismissive line, episode de-escalated, following an unsanctioned intervention by a custodial staff member. Evelyn tossed the tablet onto the plush sofa in disgust. Unsanctioned intervention. It sounded like he'd disarmed a bomb, which in a way he had. She needed to know who he was. "Peterson," she said into her phone, not bothering with pleasantries. "The janitor from the lobby today. I want his name and his file on my desk. Now." An hour later, the information was on her screen. Leo Rossi, age 38, employed by Citywide Custodial Services, a third-party contractor. Widower. One son, Noah, age 7. His file was thin, a string of low-wage jobs, no criminal record consistently positive, but brief performance reviews. Punctual, thorough, quiet. He was by all accounts completely and utterly unremarkable. Yet he had succeeded, where everyone else had failed. Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than a fluke. In the month since her husband Richard's fatal car accident, Amelia had been slowly retreating into a shell. The meltdowns were becoming more frequent. Therapists spoke of trauma and adjustment disorder, offering strategies and techniques that felt clinical and ineffective. They had given Evelyn charts and breathing exercises, but Leo Rossi had given her daughter a moment of peace with a 50-cent bottle of soap. An idea began to form in her mind, one that was audacious and unconventional, the kind of out-of-the-box thinking that had made her a billionaire. She didn't just want to thank him. A monetary bonus felt crass and dismissive, a way of reducing his profound act of kindness to a simple transaction. She wanted more. She wanted that calm, that quiet magic for Amelia. The next day, she had Leo Rossi summoned to her office. Leo stood outside the imposing oak doors of the CEO's office, his heart pounding against his ribs. He was wearing his cleanest uniform, but he felt grimy and out of place. He'd been pulled aside by his supervisor an hour ago, his face grim. "The big boss wants to see you." "What did you do?" Leo's mind raced. He was going to be fired. He had overstepped, broken some unwritten rule of the corporate caste system. He thought of Noah, of the rent, of the precarious stability he had fought so hard to build. When the door opened, he was ushered into an office larger than his entire apartment. The view of the city was breathtaking, but Leo barely noticed. He focused on the woman behind a vast, empty desk. Evelyn Vance looked even more intimidating up close. Her gaze was intense, analytical, as if she were trying to deconstruct him into a series of data points. "Mr. Rossi," she began, her voice cool and even. "Please sit." Leo sat stiffly on the edge of a chair that probably cost more than his car. "I'll be direct," she said, steepling her fingers. "I reviewed the security footage from the lobby yesterday. You intervened in a personal family matter." Leo swallowed hard. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't mean to overstep. I just saw the little girl was having a hard time. I can clear out my locker. You're not being fired, Mr. Rossi." The words hung in the air, and Leo's brain took a moment to process them. He wasn't being fired. On the contrary, Evelyn continued, her voice losing a fraction of its icy edge. "I was impressed. What you did was effective. More effective than a team of specialists I pay a great deal of money." She paused, watching him, gauging his reaction. Leo remained silent, his expression a mixture of relief and confusion. "My daughter Amelia, Evelyn," said the name sounding personal and fragile in this corporate sanctuary. "She has struggled since her father passed away. She has difficulty processing strong stimuli. Situations can become overwhelming for her." Leo nodded slowly. He understood. He thought of Noah's fear of loud noises after Maria's illness. "I have a proposition for you," Evelyn said, leaning forward. "It is unconventional, I admit. I would like to hire you. Not as a janitor. I want you to work for me personally." Leo stared at her, dumbfounded. "Doing what Amelia has a caretaker, of course. A nanny. But what she needs is something different. A calming presence. Someone to, I don't know, blow bubbles?" The last two words sounded absurd in this high-powered office, and a faint hint of color rose in Evelyn's cheeks. "I want you to be a sort of companion for her. A few hours a day after school. To be there in the house, to help create a peaceful environment. The pay would be substantially more than what you are earning now." Leo was speechless. A bubble blower, a professional, calming presence. The idea was ridiculous. It felt like charity, a rich woman's whim. His pride bristled. He wasn't a project. He was a man doing an honest day's work to provide for his son. "Ma'am, with all due respect," he said, his voice finding its footing. "I'm a janitor. I clean floors. I don't know anything about being a companion to a child." "You knew what to do yesterday," she countered swiftly. "You didn't read it in a book or learn it in a seminar. You just knew. That is what I want to hire. That instinct." "I have a son," Leo said, thinking of another reason this wouldn't work. "I have to pick him up from school. My evenings are for him." "Bring him with you," Evelyn said, without a moment's hesitation. "Our home is large. There is a garden. They can play." The offer was staggering. More money than he could imagine, and he wouldn't have to sacrifice time with Noah. It was a lifeline, a way out of the constant grinding worry about bills and the future. But it felt wrong, like he was being paid for a simple act of human decency. "Why me?" he asked the question, genuine. "You could hire anyone, the best in the world." Evelyn's corporate mask cracked for a second, and Leo saw the weary mother beneath. because the best in the world stand around with clipboards while my daughter screams. You knelt on the floor with her. I'm not hiring your resume, Mr. Rossi. I'm hiring what I saw yesterday. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw the desperation she was trying so hard to conceal. It was the same desperation he felt every time he worried about Noah's future, every time he felt the crushing loneliness of being a single parent. In that moment, she wasn't a billionaire CEO. She was just a mum trying to save her kid. I'll need to think about it, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Evelyn nodded, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. She clearly wasn't used to people not jumping at her offers. Very well. My assistant will give you my personal number. Let me know by tomorrow morning. Leo walked out of the office, his mind reeling. He had walked in, expecting to lose his job. He walked out with an offer that could change his life and his son's life forever. But as he rode the elevator down, away from the penthouse suite and back to the world of mops and buckets, he couldn't shake a feeling of deep unease. He was being invited into a world where he didn't belong, and he feared the price of admission might be more than he was willing to pay. After a long, sleepless night of weighing pride against pragmatism, Leo called Evelyn Vance. He accepted her offer, laying out 2 firm conditions. It would be a trial period of 1 month, and he would be treated as an employee, not a guest or a charity case. Evelyn agreed without hesitation, her relief palpable even over the phone. The following Monday, Leo found himself driving his beat-up 10-year-old sedan through a set of imposing wrought-iron gates that opened onto a long, winding driveway. The Vance estate was less a house and more a small private resort. It was a modern mansion of glass and white stone, surrounded by acres of perfectly manicured lawns, ancient oak trees, and a garden that looked like it had been lifted from a magazine cover. Noah sat in the passenger seat, his eyes as wide as saucers. "Is this a castle, Dad?" he whispered in awe. "Something like that," Buddy Leo murmured, feeling a fresh wave of intimidation. His small 2-bedroom apartment could fit inside the mansion's garage. Evelyn met them at the door, dressed not in a power suit, but in casual slacks and a cashmere sweater. The change was disarming, making her seem younger, more approachable. Beside her, holding tightly to her hand, was Amelia. The little girl looked at Leo with a flicker of recognition, then her eyes fell on Noah, who was half hiding behind his father's legs. The initial meeting was awkward. The cavernous, art-filled house felt more like a museum than a home. Every surface was pristine, every object perfectly placed. It was a stark contrast to the comfortable lived-in chaos of Leo's apartment, with its crayon drawings taped to the fridge and mismatched furniture. Leo's role was loosely defined. He was there to be a presence to engage with Amelia if she was willing, and to simply exist as a calming influence. The first few days he mostly observed. He watched Amelia interact with her nanny, a stern but professional woman named Ms. Albright, who seemed to view Leo's presence as a personal affront. He saw how Amelia would play silently by herself for hours, building elaborate structures with magnetic tiles, never speaking a word. The breakthrough came not from Leo, but from Noah. While Leo and Amelia were in the sprawling garden, Noah, who had been shyly kicking a soccer ball by himself, accidentally kicked it too hard. It rolled to a stop right at Amelia's feet. She stared at the ball, then at Noah. "Sorry," Noah mumbled, scuffing his shoe on the grass. Amelia didn't respond. She just nudged the ball with her toe. "You want to play?" Noah asked, his childlike hope overriding his shyness. Amelia looked at Leo, then at her mother, who was watching from a window. Then she gave the tiniest of nods. What followed was a tentative, mostly silent game of passing the ball back and forth. But then Noah tripped and fell, scraping his knee. He didn't cry, but his face scrunched up in pain. Before Leo could even move, Amelia, who shied away from most human contact, walked over to Noah. She looked at his scraped knee, then looked at him with an expression of deep concern. She reached out a hesitant finger and gently poked the grass next to the scrape. "Ouch," she whispered. It was the first word she had spoken directly to either of them. From that moment on, something shifted. The two children formed a quiet, unspoken bond. Noah's gentle, easygoing nature seemed to be the perfect antidote to Amelia's anxious energy. He didn't push her to talk or demand she play in a certain way. He simply included her, passing her a crayon or rolling a toy car in her direction, creating a space for her to join in when she felt ready. Leo found his own role evolving. He wasn't just a companion for Amelia. He was becoming a part of the house's rhythm. He'd help the kids build epic Lego castles on the floor, his large, calloused hands surprisingly nimble. He taught them how to properly skip stones across the decorative pond in the garden. And yes, on days when the world seemed to be closing in on Amelia, he would take out the small bottle of bubbles, and together, the three of them would fill the vast manicured lawn with shimmering, floating orbs. Evelyn watched it all from a distance, her heart filled with a confusing mix of gratitude and envy. She saw her daughter laughing a real, genuine belly laugh for the first time in what felt like an eternity. She saw the children sitting side by side with Leo, listening as he told a quiet story. He had a natural, unforced warmth that she, with her scheduled, efficient approach to parenting, had never been able to master. She started finding excuses to leave the office earlier. She'd come home and find them not in the designated playroom, but in the kitchen, Leo teaching the kids how to make lopsided pancakes for a snack. The house, once a silent, sterile showpiece, was now filled with the sounds of children's laughter and the smell of burnt sugar. It was starting to feel like a home. One afternoon, she found Leo in the garden, alone, fixing a broken swing. "You're a man of many talents, Mr. Rossi," she said, her voice softer than usual. "It's just Leo, please," he said, wiping his greasy hands on a rag. "And it's just a bolt. Not exactly rocket science." "To me it is," she admitted with a small smile. "I can build a company, but I can't even seem to keep a plant alive." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the children chase butterflies near the pond. "Thank you, Leo," she said, the words coming out with uncharacteristic sincerity. "For what you're doing for Amelia. For us." "I'm not doing anything special," he said, looking at her. "I'm just here. Sometimes that's all kids need, to know someone is there." His gaze was direct and unassuming, and for the first time, Evelyn didn't feel like a CEO being spoken to by an employee. She felt like a person being seen by another person. A connection sparked between them, a quiet understanding of the shared, often lonely burden of single parenthood. But their fragile, budding ecosystem was not a private one. A world of wealth and power is also a world of scrutiny. That evening, as Evelyn was reviewing a quarterly report, her phone rang. The caller ID displayed a name that made her stomach tighten. Beatrice Vance, her late husband's mother. Evelyn, dear Beatrice's voice was like chilled honey sweet, but with a cold bite. "I was just speaking with Margaret from the museum board. She mentioned seeing the most peculiar sight at your home. A workman playing with the children." Evelyn's spine stiffened. "He's an employee, Beatrice." An employee, Margaret said. He arrived in a rather dilapidated vehicle. She was concerned. "Who is this man you have around my granddaughter Evelyn?" In these uncertain times, one cannot be too careful about the kind of people we let into our lives. The implication was clear, laced with snobbery and suspicion. Beatrice had never fully approved of Evelyn, the ambitious woman who had stolen her son. Now her words were a warning shot, a reminder that Evelyn's world was a gilded cage, and there were always others watching, ready to pass judgment. The collision of her world and Leo's, she realized, was going to be far more complicated than she had ever imagined. The idyllic bubble that had begun to form around the Vance estate was fragile, and Beatrice's phone call was the first sharp object to press against its shimmering surface. Her words lingered in Evelyn's mind, planting a seed of doubt she was loath to acknowledge. She knew Beatrice was a snob, a woman who measured a person's worth by their portfolio and their pedigree. Yet the question echoed, who was Leo Rossi? The change was subtle at first. A new level of scrutiny entered Evelyn's interactions with Leo. She found herself asking seemingly casual questions about his past, his family, his late wife. Leo, open and honest, answered without suspicion. He spoke of Maria, a passionate and kind kindergarten teacher who had battled a fierce but brief illness. He talked about the financial struggles after her death, the mountain of medical bills, and his decision to take any job, no matter how humble, to ensure a stable life for Noah. His story was one of love loss and quiet resilience. Instead of allaying Evelyn's fears, his humility and lack of ambition somehow made Beatrice's insinuations seem more plausible to a small, cynical part of her brain. In her world, no one was that simple. Everyone had an angle. The whispers started outside the estate as well. A driver would mention seeing the janitor's old car at the mansion every day. A caterer for one of Evelyn's charity events would gossip about the strange new Manny. The story became twisted in the retelling, morphing from a simple employment arrangement into something salacious and transactional. The powerful widowed CEO and her blue-collar charity case. The pressure culminated when Beatrice Vance announced she was coming for a visit. It was not a request. She arrived in a black town car, sweeping into the house like a visiting monarch, her gaze sweeping over the grand foyer with an air of ownership. She was a tall, severe woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. She found Leo and the two children in the living room in the middle of a boisterous board game on the floor. The sight of her granddaughter laughing and rolling dice with this commoner and his son made her lips thin into a bloodless line. Amelia, darling, Beatrice's voice cut through the room. Come give your grandmother a kiss. Get up off that floor. It's unladylike. Amelia, who had been vibrant and joyful moments before, seemed to shrink. She obediently went to her grandmother, receiving a stiff air kiss on her cheek. Beatrice's attention then turned to Leo. She didn't look at him so much as she appraised him, her eyes cataloguing his worn jeans, his simple t-shirt, and his calloused hands. And you must be Mr. Rossi, she said, her tone making his name sound like an accusation. Yes, ma'am, Leo said, standing up. He offered a hand, but Beatrice ignored it, her gaze flickering to Noah, who was now hiding behind Leo's legs again. Evelyn has told me all about your unique position here, she continued. A very generous arrangement, I must say. You seem to have landed on your feet quite nicely. The insult was clear, wrapped in the guise of a polite observation. Leo's jaw tightened, but he refused to take the bait. I'm just happy I can help Amelia. Yes, well, we Vances have always been patrons of the less fortunate, Beatrice said, with a dismissive wave of her hand before turning her full attention back to Evelyn. The rest of the visit was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Beatrice commented on how relaxed the household security had become. She reminisced loudly about her son Richard and the high standards he had for everyone in his life. Every word was a subtle jab at Evelyn, a questioning of her judgment as a mother and as the steward of the Vance family name. The real attack came later that evening, after the children were in bed and Leo had gone home. Beatrice and Evelyn sat in the starkly modern living room, a chess match of wills playing out over glasses of iced tea. "I don't like him," Evelyn Beatrice stated flatly. "There's an opportunism in his eyes. Men like that, they see a woman like you, wealthy, powerful, and recently widowed, and they see a winning lottery ticket. That's ridiculous," Evelyn retorted, her voice sharper than she intended. "He is a kind, decent man who has been wonderful for Amelia. Kindness is a currency, my dear. He's using your daughter to get to you. Have you even looked into his background, or did you just pluck him off the lobby floor because of one lucky moment with a child's toy? I have his employee file." "An employee file," Beatrice scoffed. "That tells you nothing. I'm talking about a real background check, financials, debts, past associations. A woman in your position cannot afford to be naive. You have a responsibility to this family, to Richard's memory, to protect your daughter from predators." The word predator hung in the air, ugly and venomous. It was a vile accusation, but Beatrice's certainty was unnerving. Was she being naive? Had her desperation to help Amelia blinded her to a potential threat? The world she lived in was full of sharks who smelled blood in the water. She had fended them off in the boardroom for years. Had she carelessly invited one into her own home? "He's not like that," Evelyn insisted, though a sliver of uncertainty had crept into her voice. "Prove it," Beatrice challenged, her eyes gleaming. "Do a proper investigation. For Amelia's sake. If he is as wholesome as a fairy tale, then you'll have nothing to worry about. But if I'm right, you need to get rid of him before he sinks his claws in any deeper." Beatrice left the next morning, her visit having accomplished its mission perfectly. She had replaced the fragile trust and budding warmth in the house with the cold shadows of suspicion. That afternoon, feeling like a traitor, Evelyn Vance picked up the phone and called the head of her corporate security, a man who specialized in discreet and brutally thorough background investigations. She told herself it was for Amelia's protection, but as she gave the order, she felt a profound sense of shame, knowing she was betraying the trust of the one person who had brought light back into her daughter's world. The report landed on Evelyn's desk 2 days later. It was a thick, spiral-bound document, cold and impersonal, and it felt like a betrayal just to touch it. Her head of security, a former federal agent named Calloway, had been ruthlessly efficient. He hadn't just uncovered facts, he had woven them into a narrative, and it was a damning one. Leo Rossi's life was laid bare in black and white. There was the expected string of low-wage jobs, but Calloway had dug deeper. He'd found the mountain of medical debt left after Maria's death, totaling nearly $100,000. He'd found a subsequent default on a small personal loan and a near foreclosure on his previous apartment. Most damningly, he'd uncovered that, just a week before the incident in the lobby, Leo had been served a final notice on a significant utility bill threatening to cut off his power. Calloway's summary at the front of the report was clinical and devastating. Subject exhibits a pattern of financial instability and significant debt. His sudden proximity to a high net worth individual following a public, heroic act is statistically suspicious. Subject fits the profile of an individual highly motivated to seek financial advantage through emotional manipulation. Every word was a poisoned dart. Evelyn read it, and then reread it, the cold logic seeping into the cracks of doubt that Beatrice had created. The timing was almost too perfect. A desperate man on the verge of having his lights shut off, suddenly finds himself in a position to charm the billionaire CEO. Was the bubble incident really a spontaneous act of kindness or a brilliantly calculated gamble? Her mind, trained to see patterns and mitigate risk, began to spin. She recalled his initial hesitation to take the job. Was that genuine pride or a clever negotiation tactic to make himself seem more noble, less desperate? She thought of his easy warmth with the children. Was it real or a performance for her benefit? That afternoon, she was scheduled to attend a quarterly meeting with the Vance Innovations Board of Trustees. It was a formality usually, but Beatrice, who held a significant number of shares in trust for Amelia, had insisted on attending. The meeting started innocuously enough, with reports on earnings and projections. Then, under the guise of new business, Beatrice cleared her throat. "I have a matter of personal and corporate security I wish to discuss." She announced, her eyes locking on Evelyn. "It has come to my attention that Evelyn has hired a man, a Mr. Leo Rossi, in a domestic capacity. A man with a deeply troubling financial history who now has unrestricted access to her home, her child, and, by extension, the sensitive information inherent to the CEO's private life." The boardroom went silent. The other members, mostly stoic silver-haired men, shifted uncomfortably. "This is a private matter," Beatrice Evelyn said, her voice dangerously low. "Is it?" Beatrice countered, sliding a thin file folder across the polished table. It was a condensed, even more damning version of Calloway's report. A man with crippling debt on the verge of bankruptcy is now the constant companion of the CEO and her sole heir. This isn't a private matter. It's a liability. It's a textbook blackmail scenario waiting to happen. It shows a staggering lapse in judgment. The accusation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. She had been outmaneuvered, cornered in front of her own board. Beatrice had done her own digging. When Leo arrived at the mansion that afternoon, with Noah, the atmosphere was thick with a new, chilling tension. Miss Albright, the nanny, whisked the children away to the playroom with a curt nod, leaving Leo alone with Evelyn in the grand entryway. Evelyn didn't invite him to sit. She stood with her arms crossed, her face a mask of cold fury and hurt. "I ran a background check on you, Leo," she said, her voice devoid of its recent warmth. Leo's stomach dropped. He felt exposed, violated. A what? Why, my mother-in-law raised some concerns. She thought I was being naive. Evelyn gave a short, bitter laugh. It turns out she was right. She held up the report. $100,000 in medical debt, loan defaults, a power cut-off notice a week before you saved the day in my lobby. Is there anything else I should know? Was this whole thing a setup? Did you see a desperate mother and see your ticket out of poverty? The accusation hit Leo like a physical blow. He stared at her, his mind reeling from the injustice of it. He saw the hurt and suspicion in her eyes, and realized that the trust they had built was gone, replaced by the ugly reality of her world. "You think I planned it?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "You think I used my son's bubble toy as part of some scheme to... What seduce you steal from you? The timing is convenient, isn't it?" She shot back her own pain, making her cruel. "You needed money, and suddenly you're the hero to the rescue of the billionaire's daughter." Leo felt a cold anger rise within him, an anger born of wounded pride and profound disappointment. He had let his guard down. He had started to believe that this connection was real, that two people from different worlds could meet on the common ground of parenthood and loss. He had been a fool. "The debt," he said, his voice shaking with restrained emotion, "is because my wife got sick. because I held her hand through every single treatment and promised her I would never let our son see me give up. The lone defaults are because, after she died, I chose to work fewer hours so I could be there to pick Noah up from school instead of leaving him with strangers. That debt is not my shame, Miss Vance. It is a testament to the fact that I loved my wife, and I love my son more than money. He took a step closer, his eyes blazing with a dignity she couldn't buy. I came to work for you because I saw a mother who was hurting and a little girl who was lost, and I thought I could help. I never asked you for anything but a fair wage for an honest job. I never once looked at you or your daughter as a ticket to anything. His words hit her with the force of truth, cutting through the fog of Beatrice's poison. She saw the raw, genuine hurt on his face, and for the first time she realized the terrible mistake she had made. But it was too late. The damage was done. "I can't work here anymore," Leo said, his voice flat, resolute. "I can't be in a place where my character is measured by my bank account. I won't have my son in a house where his father is seen as a predator." He turned and walked toward the playroom to get Noah his back straight, his shoulders conveying a sense of profound and final departure. "Leo, wait," Evelyn called out, a note of desperation finally breaking through her anger. But he didn't stop. He didn't even look back. Evelyn Vance stood alone in her vast, silent marble foyer, the damning report in her hand, feeling as heavy as a tombstone. She had tried to protect her world from a perceived threat, and in doing so, she had shattered the best thing that had entered it in years. The silence that descended upon the Vance estate in the days following Leo's departure was profound and suffocating. The sounds of laughter that had begun to fill the hallways were gone. The smell of slightly burnt pancakes no longer lingered in the kitchen. The house reverted to what it had been before, a pristine, lonely museum. The effect on Amelia was immediate and devastating. She regressed completely, withdrawing into a shell even deeper and more fortified than before. She refused to speak to Miss Albright, refused her favorite foods, and spent her days sitting by the large window overlooking the garden, staring at the swing set Leo had fixed. One afternoon, Evelyn found her holding the small, empty bottle of bubble solution Leo had accidentally left behind, clutching it to her chest like a holy relic. "Where is Leo?" Amelia asked, her voice small and fragile. It was the first direct question she had asked her mother in a week. And where is Noah? Evelyn's heart fractured. "Leo. Had to go, sweetie. He has a new job." The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. Amelia's lower lip trembled. "Did he leave because of me? Was I bad? No, baby, of course not. Or—" Evelyn rushed to reassure her, kneeling and trying to pull her into a hug. But Amelia stiffened, pulling away. The easy connection they had started to build, facilitated by Leo's presence, was gone. Evelyn was once again on the outside, looking in at her daughter's private world of grief. For Leo, returning to his old life was jarring. The janitorial work felt more monotonous, the hours longer. The quiet rhythm of his apartment, once a comfort, now felt empty. Noah was the one who voiced their shared loss. "When are we going back to Amelia's house?" "Dad," he asked one evening over dinner, pushing his spaghetti around his plate. "I miss their garden, and Amelia doesn't have anyone else to play soccer with." "We're not going back, buddy," Leo said gently, the words feeling heavy and final. "Why did you get fired?" "No, I quit." "But—" Why, Noah's question was simple, but the answer was impossibly complex. How could he explain class suspicion and wounded pride to a 7-year-old? It was just time for a change was all he could manage. He saw the disappointment in his son's eyes and felt a fresh pang of guilt. He had not only lost a job that had offered them a better future, but he had also taken away his son's new friend. Meanwhile, Evelyn was adrift in a sea of regret. Leo's parting words echoed in her mind. That debt is not my shame. It is a testament to the fact that I loved my wife. She had taken his hardship, the very proof of his character and love, and twisted it into a weapon against him. She had allowed Beatrice's venomous class-based paranoia to poison her own judgment. She tried to rationalize her actions. She was a CIO. Risk assessment was part of her DNA. She was a mother, and protecting her child was her primary directive. But deep down, she knew this wasn't about protection. It was about fear. Fear of being vulnerable. Fear of trusting someone so completely outside her gilded world, and fear of what people like Beatrice would say. Her friend and board member, Genevieve, a sharp, empathetic woman who had known Evelyn for years, came to visit her at home. She found Evelyn staring blankly at a stock market report, though it was clear her mind was miles away. "You look terrible," Genevieve said, settling into an armchair without being asked. "And this house feels like a morgue again. What happened to your bubble man?" Evelyn finally broke. The dam of her composure cracked, and the whole story poured out the bubbles, the connection, Beatrice's visit, the background, check the horrible confrontation. Genevieve listened patiently, her expression unreadable. When Evelyn was finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "So you let your monster-in-law, a woman who has resented you since the day you met her son, convince you that a decent man was a con artist," Genevieve said, her voice gentle but firm. "And you used your corporate security team to dig for dirt on him, which you then threw in his face." Evelyn flinched. "When you put it like that." "How else is there to put it?" Genevieve pressed. "Evelyn, you are one of the smartest people I know. You can read a balance sheet like it's a romance novel. But when it comes to people, you let your fear and your background build a fortress around you. You had a man in this house who made your daughter laugh again. He didn't ask for your money or your secrets. He asked for your trust. And you responded by treating him like a criminal." The truth of Genevieve's words was brutal and undeniable. "What do I do?" Evelyn whispered, feeling utterly lost. "What do you want to do?" Evelyn looked toward the window, where Amelia was still sitting, a small, lonely silhouette against the setting sun. "I want to fix it," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I want him back. Not for a job. I want my daughter's laughter back. I want this house to feel like a home again." That night, Evelyn did something she hadn't done in years. She conducted her own investigation. She didn't use her security team. She went online to public records, to old news articles. She found the hospital where Maria Rossi had been treated and read the testimonials on their memorial page. Maria had been a beloved teacher. Dozens of parents had written about her kindness, her dedication. One entry stood out, written by the principal of her school. Throughout her illness, her husband Leo was her rock. He never left her side. The love between them was a lesson to us all. Evelyn finally closed her laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating the tears on her cheeks. The report from her security team had shown her the facts of Leo's life, but it had taken her own search to find the truth. She had been so wrong, and now she had to face the daunting task of trying to right a terrible wrong, knowing that an apology might not be nearly enough to bridge the chasm she had created. The next morning, Evelyn drove herself to Leo's modest brick apartment building, a world away from her own. She wore simple jeans, her corporate armor left behind. When Leo opened the door, his shock was quickly replaced by a guarded weariness. His small apartment, filled with photos of his late wife, and his son's artwork, radiated a warmth her mansion had never known. "I came here to apologize." Evelyn began, her voice raw and stripped of its usual authority. "What I did was inexcusable. It was cruel and it was wrong. I let my mother-in-law's prejudice and my own fears dictate my actions. I took the proof of your love for your family and twisted it into something ugly." Her apology was total a confession of her own failings. "This isn't about the job. I'm asking for your forgiveness. I'm asking if you and Noah would consider being a part of our lives again. Not as an employee, as friends, as family." The word hung in the air, full of hope. Before Leo could respond, the apartment buzzer rang. It was Beatrice Vance, arriving like a vulture to offer Leo a severance package in exchange for his permanent silence. She swept in her eyes, full of triumphant spite. But as Beatrice began her speech, Evelyn stepped forward, a fire in her eyes Leo had never seen. "Get out, Beatrice," she commanded, her voice like steel. "You created this mess with your bitterness and your hate. Leo Rossi is a man of integrity and love qualities you wouldn't recognize. He is welcome in my life. You are not." Stunned into silence, Beatrice turned and left defeated. The tension vanished with her. Leo looked at Evelyn, who had not just apologized, but had fiercely defended him. She had chosen him. A slow smile spread across his face. "My house is probably too small for the four of us," he said softly. That afternoon was not an end, but a true beginning. They went to a park, all four of them. As Noah and Amelia played on the swings, their laughter chasing away the last of the shadows, Leo sat with Evelyn on a bench. He pulled out the familiar bottle of bubble solution. As the sun began to set, they filled the air with shimmering iridescent spheres, each one a fragile promise. The bubbles floated between them, connecting the quiet, kind-hearted man and the powerful, brilliant woman, not as a janitor and a CEO, but as two people building a new family from the pieces of their past. In the end, this wasn't a story about a billionaire and a janitor. It was a story about what happens when we choose to see beyond the labels and uniforms that society assigns us. It was about two lonely parents, a grieving mother and a resilient father, who found a common language, not in words or wealth, but in the simple, silent act of kindness. Leo's bubbles were more than just soap and water. They were a reminder that sometimes the most profound solutions to our biggest problems are gentle, simple, and offered with a humble heart. Their story teaches us that true value isn't measured in stock prices or square footage, but in moments of connection, in the courage to apologize, and in the willingness to build a new family from a place of love. If this story touched your heart, please help us share it by hitting the like button. Consider subscribing to our channel and turning on notifications so you don't miss our next story. And please share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed a simple act of kindness change everything? We'd love to hear your story. Thank you for watching.